Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Scheid. On behalf of the board of the City Club of Idaho Falls, I want to thank you for joining us for today's program. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank the many sponsors who make our City Club presentations possible. They include the Idaho National Laboratory, Bank of Idaho, Fluor, Idaho, Idaho State University, the Idaho Humanities Council, and KISU-FM. We also want to extend a sincere thanks to the team at IE Productions for providing us with their studio and their time to help us produce today's program. For information on future City Club events, please visit the ifcityclub.com. As well as on Facebook, this program will be posted to the IE Productions YouTube page, and a link to the program will be available via the Idaho City Club website. For those of you who are new to us, the City Club of Idaho Falls is an independent, nonpartisan forum for the discussion of public affairs. We exist to sponsor and to promote civil dialogue and discourse on all matters of public interest. We strive to do so in a nonpartisan and non-sectarian manner while encouraging broad participation by the community at large. Before I introduce today's moderator, I want to tell you about our upcoming programs. On April 6th, City Club will welcome Dr. Marlene Trump, the president of Boise State University. On the 29th of April, Congressman Mike Simpson will be at our podium to talk about his very extensive proposals surrounding the efforts to save Idaho's salmon and steelhead. Don't miss these very important and interesting programs. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Park Price. Park is a board member of the City Club of Idaho Falls. In his spare time, he is also chairman of the board of directors of the Bank of Idaho, the chair of the board of the College of Eastern Idaho, a trustee of Public Employees Retirement System of Idaho, and a director of Delta Dental Plan of Idaho. Park graduated with a BA in economics degree from Dartmouth College. His interest in economics and banking have been put to good use during his recently completed 6-year term as director of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, the Salt Lake branch. Prior to his service with the Fed, Mr. Price served as a director of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Seattle. Before joining Bank of Idaho, he was the owner and the president of Park Price Motor Company of Pocatello from 1979 to 2003. Mr. Price served on the boards of numerous business and civic organizations, including the chair of Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, chair of the Idaho Community Foundation, and chair of READY, a regional economic development organization for Eastern Idaho. Park?
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate it. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Freeman to you today. Matt has been the executive director for the Idaho State Board of Education since 2015. I've known and served with Matt during his term as executive directors on committees, task forces, and of course, in my role as chair of the Board of Trustees for the College of Eastern Idaho. It's fortunate that Matt is calm for a role that is often highly charged. Matt keeps his eye on the target during meetings, testimony, or providing input on policy matters. State statutes say the Board of Education is constitutionally charged with providing general supervision, governance, and control of all public education in the state. We see Matt's job as herding cats. He certainly knew what he was getting into, as he previously served as the board's deputy director and chief fiscal officer for over 5 years. Matt is a career public servant. Prior to working for the board, Matt spent 9 years as a budget analyst for the Idaho legislature, the last 4 of which as the higher education analyst. Matt's professional experience also includes private sector government relations and communications work. He also spent time in Washington, D.C., where he served as counsel and legislative assistant for a member of Congress. Matt, we're looking forward to your remarks today, since education has absorbed most of the oxygen in the legislative room. For those of us in business, an educated workforce is vital if we are to remain competitive in the economy of today and tomorrow. As you have questions for Matt, please send them along in the chat function, and we will pose them in the Q&A portion of our meeting. Matt, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Park, and thank you to the Idaho Falls City Club. I wish that I could be there, or we could all be together in person. Hopefully that day will come soon. And as Park mentioned, we've known each other for a while, and even in spite of that, he decided to moderate this conversation with me, so I appreciate that. Park, you provided a brief overview of the State Board of Education and its jurisdiction. I'll just add a little bit of that to the listening audience. So the State Board of Education is made up of 8 members. 7 of those members are nonpartisan appointees by the governor for 5-year terms. And the 8th member is the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, which of course is a statewide elected position and holds their position on the board by virtue of their office. And as Park mentioned, the board has governance, supervision, and control over all of public education, kindergarten through PhD. There are only 2 or 3 other states in the entire nation that have a consolidated governance model like that. And it really provides the board a lot of leverage to influence the education along the entire pipeline. I also want to just take an opportunity to commend our colleges and universities over this last year. They have been remarkably nimble and resilient in the midst of potentially catastrophic series of events surrounding the pandemic. The information was changing weekly, daily, sometimes even by the hour, as they tried to scramble and finish out the semester last spring, and then work over the summer to be able to bring students back in the fall. And Idaho should be proud of our institutions, because we are one of the few states in the nation that provided opportunities for in-person instruction on all 8 of our campuses. Here's a quick outline of what I'd like to cover with you this afternoon. First, I'm going to talk about the importance of building a strong higher education foundation. Second, I'll talk about the future of higher education in Idaho. And then finally, I'll provide an update on the 2021 legislative session. The GI Bill was passed in 1944, just 16 days after D-Day. And about a year later, the troops started coming home, and thousands of them, tens of thousands of them, went on to college to take advantage of that GI Bill. And that was really began the golden age of American higher education. States invested heavily and strategically in education, making it accessible and affordable for tens of thousands of Americans. In the late 80s and early 90s, financial pressures on states began to mount as the cost of Medicaid and prisons began to slowly crowd out higher education on the budget wheel. And then over the last decade, a populist groundswell has taken hold in our society, and many viewing higher education as elitist. This sentiment was captured well in a December 2017 New York Times op-ed, and I quote, "At a time when a college degree is one of the surest harbingers of higher earnings and better economic security, college itself is regarded with skepticism by many Americans and outright contempt by no small number of them. Repair is imperative because the continued competitiveness of the American economy depends on the skills of our workforce, the intellectual nimbleness of our citizens, the boldness of our scientific research, and the genius of our inventions. Our colleges and universities are central to that. When they lose support, we all lose." And then just most recently, a headline from a major article that ran just last week in a national higher education publication about the community served by one of our institutions. The headline read, "Disdain for higher education is thriving." So with that context, anytime that I'm giving a public stage to take the opportunity to talk about the value proposition of higher education, I will do it. And let me be clear. By that, I mean all forms of education, including career technical education. And I will use my own kids as an example. My wife and I have two kids. One of them just graduated from college, earning their bachelor's degree in December. They earned it in 3.5 years, and now they're gainfully employed in the field of their study. Our other child is a senior in high school, and I think it would be safe to say that school is not their favorite subject. And yet we have spent a lot of time with them explaining why it is really an imperative for them to get additional training after high school. And so they are registered to attend classes in a career technical field at one of our community colleges this fall. And I think that will be an excellent opportunity for them to grow. So I want to talk about several areas under the umbrella of the value proposition of higher education. First, I'll talk about employment. Last fall, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, released its 10-year employment projections. Here are some of the key findings. Healthcare occupations and those associated with healthcare account for 13 of the 30 fastest growing occupations from 2019 to 2029. Most of which require post-high school education or training. For example, home health aid jobs are estimated to grow by 34% over the next decade. These jobs only require a high school diploma plus on-the-job training, and they pay a median annual wage of just over $25,000. By contrast, an occupational therapy assistant, which requires a 2-year associate's degree, those positions are projected to grow by 35% and pay a median wage of $61,500, or about 2.5 times more than a home health aide. Physician assistants, which require a master's degree in order to practice, pay a median wage of $112,300 with a 31% growth estimate, almost 2 times that of the salary median wage of the occupational therapist assistants. In other words, education pays. So that's employment. Let's talk about unemployment. And if we could have the first slide, please. This graph shows national unemployment rates over the past 20 years for individuals 25 years and older. As of February 2021, those with a no high school diploma had an unemployment rate of 10.1%. Those with holding a high school diploma had an unemployment rate of 7.2%. Those with some college or an associate degree, unemployment of 5.9%, and then a bachelor's degree or higher, unemployment rate of 3.8%. And this trend holds true for the past 20 years, even during recessionary periods, which are represented by the gray vertical bars on this graph. If we could have the next slide, please. You may have heard of the so-called K-shaped economic recovery our nation has been experiencing since last fall. On this graph, I have circled inflection points and job losses that diverged last fall when there was a spike in the virus. In general, higher wage employees fared better in terms of unemployment, in large part because they are more likely to work remotely, while lower wage service industry jobs were hit the hardest. A February report by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that, all in all, employment among high wage workers is now slightly above where it was before the pandemic hit. And employment among both middle age groups is just slightly below. By contrast, employment among low-wage employers remains 14% below pre-pandemic levels and is trending down again. However, one's economic status was not the sole determinant how one weathered the pandemic. The pandemic-related job losses disproportionately affected women, minorities, and younger workers. Again, the Federal Reserve explained that some in these groups may be overrepresented in the two industries hit hardest by the pandemic, those industries being leisure and hospitality and retail, including younger workers and those without a college degree. College graduates, for example, tend to have more flexibility in their jobs and a greater ability to work remotely. So we've talked about how a college degree impacts employment and unemployment. Let's talk about college earnings premium, or in other words, the earning power of college graduates versus non-degree holders. And if we could go to the next slide, please. This chart shows the cumulative earnings by education level. And if you notice the orange line, these are those holding a bachelor's degree. For the first 4 years, that line is flat. And that's because that's when those individuals are going to college. And that's the opportunity cost. They're not in the workforce, obviously, while they're working. So according to the College Board, the typical 4-year college graduate who enrolls at age 18 and graduates in 4 years can expect to earn enough by age 33 to compensate for being out of the labor force for 4 years and for borrowing the full amount of their education without any grant aid. So tuition, fees, books, and supplies. So even if you borrow the money for all of that without any grant aid, you can see where the lines converge and then the orange line quickly excels and goes above the others. Furthermore, the College Board estimates that over the course of a lifetime and accounting for the costs of obtaining a degree, individuals with a bachelor's degree earn about $400,000 more than individuals with a high school degree. The financial benefits of an associate degree are roughly half as large. If we could have the next slide, please. This graph shows the wage premium for recent college graduates versus workers holding only a high school diploma. And you can see that the blue line is the median wage for those holding a bachelor's degree, and the yellow line is the median wage for those holding a high school diploma. And then you can see that the wage gap has held relatively constant over time, and the economic benefits associated with a college degree last a lifetime. And note the differences during the recession. And those are in the vertical gray bars. That even in times of recession, particularly in the early 2000s, and then again in the Great Recession in the late 2000s, that the blue line shows that bachelor degree holders came out of that more quickly and with a wage increase, whereas the high school diploma holders stayed flat or even declined. If we could have the next slide, please. A recent study by the Fordham Institute looked at median earnings by education level. The study showed Idahoans with bachelor's degrees earn 27% more than those with associate degrees. So that's 61,000 versus 48,000. And college degree holders earned 49% more than those with high school diplomas. Michael Neitzel, a contributing editor for Forbes magazine, wrote that this study confirmed a highly replicated result. Individuals with a bachelor's degree earn substantially more than workers with only high school diplomas, and they do so everywhere in the nation. We could have the next slide. This graph shows the educational wealth gap from 1989 to 2019 based on the Federal Reserve Board's triennial survey of consumer finances. And this is really a gold standard study for this type of work. I know this graph is pretty busy, but what it shows is that the wealth gap for college-educated families continues to grow. Conversely, families with a GED or with less than a high school diploma had about 8% less median wealth in 2019 than in 2016 in inflation-adjusted dollars. And you can see the green call out shows that they were the only group, the least educated families were the only group to see a loss in their median wealth over that 3-year period based on that survey. So suffice it to say, going to college still pays big dividends, but of course the return is not just to the individual. Higher education is really a force multiplier. We've already established a college degree is more resilient in times of economic volatility, but college graduates are also more likely to have health insurance and to engage in healthy behaviors, have retirement plans, and be civically engaged. The intangible benefits also manifest as core competencies. Dr. Anthony Carnevale, the director of Georgetown University's Center on Education and the Workforce, is one of the nation's leading labor economists. Last year, he co-authored a report that explored the 5 most in-demand competencies employers are looking for. The report observes that educational attainment has been such an effective way for workers to adapt to skill-biased technological change that researchers have attributed the rising college earnings premium to an undersupply of college-educated workers arising from the race between education and technology. The report goes on to say that the evidence suggests that workers' investments in education are also investments in the cognitive competencies used most intensively that tend to be held by workers with higher levels of education. So we've talked about employment, unemployment, the wage premium. Now I want to talk about meeting employer demands. Occasionally, I hear criticism from business and government leaders that our colleges and universities are producing too many graduates with degrees in fields that don't command a strong market value. I have 3 responses to this critique. First, our institutions have been working incredibly hard to listen to the needs of area and regional employers. A number of academic programs have been developed or phased out based on job market demands. For example, last year, the legislature appropriated $1 million to the 3 universities to jointly develop cybersecurity programs with common learning outcomes and pathways to careers. The university presidents decided to collaborate with the community colleges on cybersecurity as a statewide initiative. As was reported to the state board last month, looking at cybersecurity education and research through a statewide lens means together we can offer more streamlined and comprehensive educational ladders, pathways, and options. In short, our institutions are working collaboratively and strategically to be proactive and responsive to the labor market. My second response to the critique is that the American tradition in higher education is one of intellectual curiosity, exploration, and growth. Our colleges and universities do not and cannot compel students to only major in science, technology, engineering, or math, nor do I believe they should. The appropriate role for our institutions is to provide robust advising and career planning so students can make informed decisions. And then finally, we have to remember we're talking about a large population of 18 to 25-year-olds. And those of you who are or have been parents of a young adult know that they tend to decide things for themselves. I do not believe it's fair to hold our institutions in contempt for degree choices that their students make. In the final analysis, the economic and intrinsic value of post-secondary education continues to stand the test of time. The value proposition of higher education is as strong as ever. So now I'd like to transition and talk about the future of higher education in Idaho. And first, I want to take an opportunity to just recognize that the state board has had a unique window of opportunity over the past couple of years when it has hired 4 new presidents for its 4 institutions. These are remarkably talented leaders. But what's most gratifying for me is their intentional and authentic collaboration. They're looking out for what's best for students rather than parochial interests. And I just want to thank Presidents Green, Pemberton, Satterley, and Tromp for the great work that they are doing for Idaho. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that they are also collaborating with our community college presidents, and the collaboration is two-way. They meet monthly to problem solve and share ideas, and they are really a great group and a tribute to Idaho. In 2010, the state board set a goal that 60% of all Idahoans ages 25 to 34 would hold a post-secondary certificate or degree by the year 2020. And this was later extended out to the year 2025. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the goal or the rationale behind it, it's predicated on labor market research, which forecasted that by the year 2020, over 60% of the jobs in Idaho would require qualified workers to have some form of post-secondary education. It's important to understand the goal is not a measure of graduation rates or the number of credentials awarded by our institutions. Rather, it is a measure of the total number of Idaho residents holding a degree or certificate within that age group, regardless of where they obtained their education. So it's a population-based goal. And as a result, in addition to the number of Idahoans graduating from our post-secondary institutions, the goal is impacted by population in-migration and out-migration. I often get asked why other forms of training, such as apprenticeships or short-term certificates, are not included as part of the state's 60% goal. And the answer is threefold. First, since this is a population-based goal, we use census data to calculate the degree attainment rate. The census data do not include apprenticeships, so it's impossible for us to include those as part of the goal and the measure of progress. Second, by design, the goal was intended to measure degree attainment because that is what the state board oversees. The board has some ability to influence goal progress through funding and programming priorities for the institutions. There are other factors that contribute to or impact the goal that are outside of the board's span of control. Finally, just because the goal focuses on degree attainment for 60% of our population doesn't mean we as a state don't value the remaining 40% of Idahoans. Of course, many of those Idahoans are underage or retired, but it's entirely conceivable those who are of working age could also stand to benefit from an apprenticeship or workforce training program. We want all employees to get the training they need to be successful in the workplace and help power the state's economy. So where do we stand with the goal? Well, progress has held essentially flat for the past several years, around 44%. And this is despite significant effort by the state board and institutions and investment by the legislature. If I could have the next slide, please. I will say that it's noteworthy that full-time equivalent enrollment at Idaho's public institutions has grown more than 20% over the last 15 years, putting Idaho 10th in the nation for enrollment growth. And I think this graph really exemplifies why the goal's population-based methodology may be fundamentally flawed. There are just too many variables outside the state board's control that weigh down measurable progress. Speaking for myself and not for the state board, I believe that we need to adjust the goal based on outcome metrics directly related to institutions' performance, such as the number of credentials awarded. Then, each institution's recruitment, retention, and completion strategies could be tailored to their unique demographics and student populations to drive progress toward their respective institution-specific goal. But let me be clear, the underlying premise of the goal is sound. More Idahoans need some form of post-secondary education to meet the emerging and immediate needs of employers. I just believe that by restating the goal, it would be more meaningful to drive an increase in credentials awarded by our institutions. Also, looking into the future, I want to talk about the impact of the pandemic on enrollment. Generally speaking, there is an inverse relationship between post-secondary enrollment and the economy. When there is a recession or softening of the job market, recent college graduates will go on to graduate school, and those who suddenly find themselves laid off or unemployed will go to college to upskill or to perhaps seek an entirely new career. Conversely, when the economy is running hot and unemployment is low, college enrollment can see steep declines. However, we did not see this countercyclical surge in enrollment in the pandemic economy. With large sectors of the economy shuttered indefinitely and tremendous uncertainty about the job market, and perhaps students unenthusiastic about the prospects of online instruction, many did not follow the historical norms of going back to school. But of course, there is nothing normal about this pandemic. The National Student Clearinghouse reports that college enrollment of high school graduates plunged last fall across the country, down a historic 6.8% compared to 2019 high school graduates. This is a 4.5 times larger than the pre-pandemic 2019 rate. To make matters worse, the report finds that the pandemic disproportionately affected graduates of low income, high poverty, and high minority high schools, who saw an even steeper decline. Of course, these students stand to benefit the most from the economic boost of a college degree. Nationally, community college enrollment was also disproportionately and adversely impacted by the pandemic, with declines 4 times that of our public four-year institutions. In Idaho, fall enrollment at our colleges and universities was better than expected. Looking only at degree-seeking undergraduate students at our four-year institutions, Idaho State University was down 4%, Boise State was flat, University of Idaho and Lewis Clark State College were down 5% and 2% respectively. Our community colleges also fared better than their counterparts did nationally. Here in Idaho Falls, CEI was up 12%, CSI was up 4%, College of Western Idaho down 1%, and NIC and Coeur d'Alene saw the steepest decline of 4%. However, as we are now in the midst of the recruitment enrollment cycle for next year, there is tremendous uncertainty among students and families. The economic shockwaves will continue to ripple through for many months to come. And in many ways, this year's high school seniors have been scarred deeper than the preceding class of 2020. We are seeing this manifest in several ways. If I could have the next slide, please. One common measure of projecting college enrollment is how many of our seniors have completed the free application for federal student aid, commonly known as the FAFSA. Through March 5th of this year, 8,127 FAFSAs have been completed by Idaho high school seniors. This is down 12.4% from the prior year. We have also seen a 12 percentage point drop in high school seniors applying through Apply Idaho, which is the state board's common application for all 8 public institutions. 53% of the class of 2020 high school graduates completed one or more application through Apply Idaho. To date, 41% of 2021 high school seniors have completed one or more application through Apply Idaho. This problem is not unique to Idaho, but it is worrisome nonetheless and could adversely affect Idaho families, communities, and our workforce for years to come. But despite the chilling effect of the pandemic is having on students' college plans, what students need to know is that the return on investment remains strong. Last summer, 2 researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York posted a fascinating study entitled "Delaying College During the Pandemic Can Be Costly." Interestingly, the authors found that the rate of return for a bachelor's degree actually increases, largely because the opportunity cost of attending college has declined. Now remember, the opportunity cost is equivalent to the wages that one could have earned by working instead of going to college. But with high unemployment, especially for low-skilled workers, and potential declines in wages, the opportunity cost of going to college is less. In addition, The authors found there are sizable hidden costs to delaying college, even if for a year. First, if you give up a year's worth of wages, that could have been earned with a college degree if you had graduated a year earlier. Second, if you enter the job market a year later, it damages your entire lifetime earnings profile because you miss out on the experience and extra push that gives your wages over your working life, creating an earnings wedge each year. In essence, entering the job market a year later puts you behind for your entire career and you never really catch up. That was the conclusion of the authors. So even though this article first ran last July, its findings are still applicable to the class of 2021 high school seniors, which really takes us back to where I started, which is the value proposition of higher education. In effect, this period of economic uncertainty creates an even more compelling reason for students to go on to college and invest in their future. So now I will shift to the third topic, which is an update on the 2020 legislative session. I was hoping it would be a recap, but as you know, the legislature went into recess on March 19th and will not be coming back into session until April 6th. So during this legislative spring break, I will talk to you about where we're at currently with our budgets. For the community colleges budget, this has passed the legislature and is on its way to the governor. It reflects a 7.5% increase in state funding. And I'll call out a couple of specific areas of investment that are included in that budget. There's a $200,000 budget, $200,000 is provided to increase capacity of nursing programs at CSI, CWI, and NIC. That's $200,000 each for those three colleges in order to help meet the medical and healthcare needs throughout the state. And then there is a $1 million budget line for zero textbook cost degrees. This is a complete pathway. This funding will be used to develop a complete pathway to a 2-year credential that has zero textbook costs. This will help Idaho's community colleges significantly decrease the financial burden of textbook costs to students by formalizing the adoption of open, free, and low-cost course materials across entire academic programs. My office will administer this money through a 2-phase grant program. Each college will receive a small planning grant to develop a full implementation plan. And then each college that prepares a plan will then receive a larger grant to build out one or more zero textbook cost degree pathways based on that plan. And then finally, in a separate budget, I would like to call out that the College of Eastern Idaho here in Idaho Falls received $3 million for their future tech facility. And they received $1.2 million in this current year. So they have a total of $4.2 million they've received from the state to develop the future tech facility. Now I'll shift to our colleges and universities, our 4-year institutions. And if I could have the next slide, please. In this slide is a 15-year history of public education appropriations per full-time equivalent student by state. And so for the period 2004 through 2019, you can see that Idaho's appropriation per full-time equivalent student is down 6.1%. If I could have the next slide. This is a funding history going all the way back to 1980, looking at the state general fund, which are tax dollars, and tuition, which are the legislature appropriates spending authority for tuition at our 4-year institutions. And you can see, a pretty stark correspondence that as there was a decline in the state general fund appropriation, there was a corresponding increase in tuition. And those lines have not yet crossed. I'm glad to see, and you can also see at the very end in 2021, where there's suddenly a K shape there. That's because the State Board of Education and its college and universities froze tuition for the current academic year, and there was also an increase in the general fund. So you have that K shape there. So for the college and universities budget, it has passed the Senate, and it is waiting for a vote in the House. The budget as written reflects a 2.6% increase in state funds. There is also an investment in the nursing program at Lewis Clark State College, similar to 3 of the 4 community colleges. That's $400,000 for them to increase capacity of their nursing program. I also note that over the past couple of years, a Boise-based lobbying organization has been very outspoken and critical about what they allege to be social justice activities, programs, and instruction occurring on university campuses. Boise State in particular has drawn fire from this organization's well-funded campaign, but other institutions are also under scrutiny. And now a number of legislators have joined in that scrutiny. As a result, the appropriation bill includes a punitive measure, and that's which cuts Boise State's budget by $409,000 associated with social justice programming on campus. That funding, that $409,000, is reallocated to Lewis Clark State College to help offset any tuition increase. The appropriation further requires the institutions to verify that no appropriated funds are used to support social justice student activities, clubs, events, and organizations on campus. And by inclusion of this requirement, legislators want to make sure that institutions get the message that legislators don't want state funding going towards this type of program. There is also language regarding student activity fees. There was legislation that would have required the state board to make student activity fees optional. And in working with the sponsors of that legislation, we, instead of running that legislation, it was included. There's language included in the appropriation bill that the state board will work with its institutions to provide a breakout of all the fees that are charged students, develop a common naming convention for those fees, and also develop an opt-out schedule for those fees. And then finally, we just note that the last fall, the presidents publicly pledged they would not request a tuition increase if the governor's budget recommendation for the college universities was funded. And this budget largely reflects the governor's budget recommendation. There is one difference, but the institutions are also receiving a large amount of federal stimulus funds that could offset that. And so with that, again, I just want to thank you all for your time, and I would happy to entertain any questions.
Well, Matt, thank you very much. That was a very enlightening review of our status of education right now, and we appreciate your leadership and involvement here. On behalf of CEI, let me just express our special appreciation for the initial funding for Future Tech. That's going to be a very exciting project that will meet the needs of the businesses in this part of the state, and I think statewide, and will certainly go a long way to help additional people become trained and to meet the needs of our workforce of the future. So that's really good. I appreciate that. Some questions have come in, and I want to talk about maybe the K-12 portion of this. Third grade literacy has been a real focus for, I think, the state board as well as the governor. We've been trying to improve the third grade literacy when a student or a child finishes third grade, he is reading at the third grade level. Has that been improved over time?
No, thank you, Park, for the question. As you noted, early childhood literacy is a top priority for Governor Little, and he has worked with the legislature to significantly invest in providing literacy intervention for particularly our K-3 students. In fact, the current year budget includes $26.1 million for literacy intervention. Unfortunately, there are a couple different circumstances that make measuring progress difficult. So, for one, we've changed our assessment measure, our assessment for literacy. We had Idaho Reading Indicator, and for the year 2019-2020, the state shifted to a new assessment tool. And so you really cannot compare the legacy IRI scores with the scores under the new tool. I think it's also difficult to determine right now because we have last spring, of course, when schools closed down, we did not have IRI was not administered. So we can't see even growth from fall 2019 to spring 2020 in IRI scores because that test wasn't administered. It's also important to remember that when we look at our kindergarten scores in IRI, then to first grade, if you look at just the raw numbers, it's generally a pretty stark drop. But there are several reasons why. First of all, kindergarten is not required in Idaho. So you have a number of students who enter into the first grade and they're in school for the first time. And so they may not be as school ready as their kindergarten counterparts. And so, and when we measure our literacy proficiency, we don't look at a cohort. So it's not just the kindergarten students that were enrolled and how they performed as first graders. We take kindergarten as a whole and first grade as a whole. And so that's where you have some noise in the numbers because of the number of first graders who did not go to kindergarten. So Park, I don't mean to punt on the question. We just don't have enough data yet to know for sure how we're doing.
Thanks, Matt. You brought up a great point as far as kindergarten. I believe the numbers are almost 50% of the children entering kindergarten aren't able to recognize numbers, letters, or colors. And as you pointed out, that makes it really hard to bring up those children in kindergarten to get them up to speed with the other kids. What are the efforts or what's being considered on trying to increase the number of students that are be able to enroll in pre-kindergarten, for example?
That increase efforts to. Could you repeat that one more time, Park?
Yeah, there's some effort to try to figure out how to get more state support for pre-kindergarten, so that you will not have as big a drop of kids that are not ready to go to kindergarten when they enter kindergarten.
Thank you. So last fall, the State Board of Education was asked by Governor Little to take the lead in applying for a federal grant for early childhood learning and school readiness. And we partnered with the Idaho Association for the Education of Young Children, which is a nonprofit organization based in Boise, in writing that grant. And we received notice on January 1st of this year that we were awarded the grant, $6 million per year, renewable for 3 years. And the purpose of that grant is really to work with a local, well, there are several elements of the grant, but one of them is to work with local collaboratives in 12 to 15 communities. And it's really, it's school districts, it's businesses, it's Head Start, it's child care centers and providers, all to identify what are the needs in their community to help make sure that their children, birth through 5, are acquire the early childhood learning and literacy skills that they need so that they can enter kindergarten school ready. That grant that we received requires spending authority from the legislature, and there has been some controversy around that. The first appropriation bill was defeated in the House by a vote of 36 to 34, and now there's a second bill that's been passed by the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee that will be, when the legislature returns from recess, will be considered. So right now, no work is being done on the grant because we don't have spending authority, but that really, the whole purpose of that is really to help local communities determine and develop the resources that they need for their families.
Well, thanks, Matt. That's exactly the explanation that I think will find a lot of interest in our City Club members. I have a question. You were talking about changes or the possible increase in tuition and the impact that might have on what kind of students might attend Idaho's institutions. And when if they reduce the funding as they did for Boise State, does that have any implications on that institution or other Idaho institutions?
Well, Park, thank you for the question. And just so for our listening audience is aware, the state board is charged with establishing tuition and fees for the four-year institutions, and that is taken up each April. So we're about a month away from the board making that determination. And as I mentioned near the closing of my remarks, the presidents have pledged to not increase tuition if they can get a budget that resembles what the governor had recommended. And right now, that's is substantially what we have in the appropriation bill that's passed the Senate. So, we're actually my state board president and I are going to be meeting with the four institution presidents a week from today, actually, to talk about kind of where we stand on that. But I can tell you that both the presidents and the state board are very strongly committed to ensuring and protecting that our education is affordable and accessible for students. We know that cost is a barrier, and so it is. The state board applies a lot of scrutiny to the decisions about increases to tuition.
Very good, thank you, Matt. One final question is: there's a project that I think our audience would be interested in called Online Idaho. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how the college and universities fit into that project?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So Online Idaho is a collaboration between the State Board of Education, Idaho's 8 public colleges and universities, and the Workforce Development Council to promote online opportunities and professional training for all Idahoans. It consists of a user-friendly, public-facing digital catalog of all online courses that are offered at Idaho's public colleges and universities. So I want to emphasize these are existing online courses, and there are a significant number of those, and they will continue to grow. So it also includes a course exchange system that will allow students who are currently enrolled, for example, at College of Eastern Idaho, to seamlessly enroll in online courses at Idaho State University or any other of our public institutions. And so it's really designed to help Idahoans, especially in our rural and remote areas, people who are unemployed or they're place bound or time bound, to be able to not only take courses, but even complete a degree entirely online. We already have the public facing portal for that, which is online.idaho.edu. That will continue to develop and grow. But this was, we were able to leverage federal stimulus money to stand up this tool, which is particularly relevant right now in a pandemic when travel is so constrained and just classroom capacity is constrained. And we just really wanted to be able to provide Idahoans with an opportunity to take advantage of online courses that are already available, but not have to go to all 8 institutions and determine what courses are available and how they might transfer. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what Online Idaho is.
Well, Matt, thank you very much. We're at the end of our time. We've got quite a number of other questions that we'll see if we can get to you for some answers. But I just wanted to express our appreciation for the service you provide to the state and the institutions, the colleges, universities, and our schools throughout the state. It's just a wonderful job. I know you've talked about Idaho being unique in having a state board that is in charge of things K through 20. That is a huge job, and I've seen their agendas, and they do an amazing amount of work, and we appreciate the work that they do along with that of your staff. So thank you so much for the time you put in on our behalf and for participating in our City Club this afternoon.
Thank you.